Hi there from Chicago. I'm Mike Hall. Glad to have you with us here for the next hour. This is Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade. A ton to get to. Emily Eamon's going to join us in just a little bit to talk about how 50% of the Final Four for volleyball is Big Ten teams. Penn State and Nebraska are meeting each other. We have a ton of basketball to get to. Jordan Taylor is going to be here in a minute. But football is where we start things off as we are getting closer and closer to the first edition of the 12-team playoff. The bracket looks like this. Ohio State plays Tennessee, Texas, Clemson, SMU, and Penn State. That's all on Saturday, but on Friday evening in legendary South Bend Notre Dame Stadium, it'll be the Fighting Irish taking on the Indiana Hoosiers, and there are plenty of topics to get into for our big story. Well, let's bring in Chris Vanini from The Athletic to talk about all things college football playoff. Now, Chris, you know, there's been all these concerns about this first year of the 12-team playoff that a team like Oregon, the only clear-cut dominant team in the country from week one till now, the #1 overall seed, the undefeated team, is kind of getting a bummer of a draw here. Is there any reason to think the format of the playoff can change soon?
Well, to change for next year, it will have to be unanimous among all the commissioners who make up that committee. That is unlikely. 2026 and beyond, when the new playoff contract starts, that's when you could expect to see big changes, potentially a larger field, a different auto bid situation, a different seeding situation. Those don't need unanimous decisions. In fact, the Big Ten and the SEC will have a lot of control over that, although other conferences will have input on that as well. You know, Oregon's got a tough draw, but I think most everybody kind of has a difficult draw. When I look at this field, I think 6-7 teams might be able to win it all. I think the last decade of college football, we've been used to 1, 2, or 3 clearly dominant teams better than everybody else. I don't know if we have that this year, and I think it's going to make for a really fun playoff. So we've had a lot of people already talking about how can we change the playoff? How can we do these things? I look at this first field and the matchups we have, and I'm just incredibly excited about it. We'll see how it goes. And depending on how it goes, the commissioners will meet after late in the season around the championship game and talk about potential changes.
Yeah, I agree with you. You're going to win a national title. You're going to have to beat multiple really, really, really good teams. So it's not, I don't think it's a very valid why. It is interesting. I think you can make it a little more fair, but I'm curious how they do change things. On that topic, before we dive into these games, do you think we'll ever get to a point where however many teams in the future get a bye would also get a home game? Because it feels like it would be such a great reward if Oregon, Georgia, whomever else also gets the home game for a playoff game that those teams that are not quite as good as them are getting.
So in an ideal world, you'd love most of these games to be at home. Home atmospheres are what college football is all about, and I think we'll see that this weekend. I think we're going to have some awesome scenes at Penn State, Ohio State, all these other places, and we're going to feel, hey, why are we doing this next round at bowl sites? And I did a story about a month ago about the logistics of putting together a first-round playoff game. And it's really hard. Like, college football games, especially the ones that are out in remote areas, are a huge endeavor to put together. And making sure you have staff, making sure tickets work, making sure parking works, all these different things. It's a lot more difficult at this time of year because a lot of the students are gone and not as many people are in town. And so if you were to do the second round over New Year's, it's a holiday at that time. You're going to have a lot of people. You're going to have to get a lot of people who are usually not working at that time coming to work. I would like for it to happen. I acknowledge it is a lot more difficult than maybe we would like to think. The bowl games are used to this. They've done this for decades. They're really good at the hospitality and the logistics of all of it. That is the reason the playoff gave for why they're still doing that, although there is certainly some tradition and relationships that are playing a factor in that as well.
Yeah, it seems like it would be so good for so many ways. And maybe if you move the schedule up just a little bit, you're not worrying about the holidays, but that's a discussion for another day. Let's get into some of these games. I would argue the most fascinating one on paper is SEC Big Ten, Tennessee, Ohio State. You mentioned you think there's 6 or 7 teams that can win it all. It's hard to think both of these two aren't in that grouping based on the talent that they have. Why should Ohio State fans be concerned in this game? Not necessarily about their team and what's going on between the ears, but about the opponent that Ohio State is facing.
I think a lot of what Tennessee likes to do is where Ohio State has struggled. In big games and big moments and big plays, Ohio State has not been able to run the ball very well. Tennessee is a top 5 rushing defense. And not only that, they've got arguably one of the best defensive lines in the country going up against an Ohio State offensive line that is banged up due to injuries. This is not the same line we saw coming into the year. If Tennessee's defensive line can own that line of scrimmage, it's really going to put Ohio State's offense in a position it doesn't want to be. This is probably a situation where Ohio State is going to have to pass to set up the run, rely on Will Howard to open up various running lanes. He's going to have to lead you to victory because I don't think the running game is going to. We saw what happened against Michigan. Ohio State couldn't run the ball. They kept trying to. You're going to have to try something different. I think Chip Kelly knows that.
And I mentioned in my question, or alluded to at least, between the ears seems to be the most important thing for Ohio State. I mean, if they were able to drop that Michigan loss and focus that their biggest goal this season is still ahead of them, they should be pretty good against Tennessee. But if they're still stuck in the mud and hearing the rumors about their head coach's future, and, oh, we lost to a 5-loss Michigan team and they planted the flag and this, that, and the other, they're going to be in real trouble this weekend.
Yes, you wonder what the atmosphere is going to be like in that stadium. Like, I have talked to some former college football players who were like, it might have been better to be on the road because when you're on the road, it's you and your teammates together. It galvanizes you. The angst in that stadium at Ohio Stadium when they played Michigan was evident right away. And that nervousness, it felt like, translated to the players. How is that going to be this time around? Are they going to be able to get over the Michigan loss and focus on what is ahead? Or are they going to let one loss become 2 and just kind of not focus and get too much in their head? I think that was a problem against Michigan. You can't let it happen against Tennessee.
Chris, can you put in perspective for me the insanity of the following sentence? Indiana is in a college football playoff game.
I still can't believe it. I mean, Indiana is the losingest college football program of all time. They've never had 10 wins in a season, let alone 11. Here they are on their college football playoff. The job that Curt Cignetti has done has been remarkable. Curtis Rourke, the transfers he brought in, everything like that. There's so many good stories and fun stories in this playoff. Arizona State, Boise State, SMU. But I really think Indiana is the one that just kind of blows your mind the most. That the Indiana Hoosiers, ahead of Alabama, ahead of Michigan, who won the national championship. It's Indiana who got an at-large berth to this college football playoff. Is truly just one of the most shocking stories we've seen in a long time in the sport.
You've covered this sport from a national perspective for a long time. The closest comp I can think of a season-long stunning story like this is the mid-'90s Northwestern team that beats Notre Dame, ends up going 10-1. No one on the planet saw that coming. Is there any other college football story that you can think of that you're like, oh, this is the closest to what we're seeing this year with Indiana?
I mean, it's not the same level, but, 8-9 years ago, UCF went from winless to undefeated in a 2-year span, and they obviously claimed a national championship in 2017 with Scott Frost. But to see that level of turnaround is just unbelievable. I mean, Indiana's had a couple of good seasons. They're in 2020, 21. When Kalen DeBoer was there for a minute, that was kind of the only time they really had it going. I grew up. I went to Michigan State. I grew up in the Big Ten, and Indiana was just always the team you could mark off as a victory on your schedule when your schedule came in. And that is not the case right now. It's probably not going to be the case moving forward with what the Indiana has done to retain Curt Cignetti and give him the resources moving forward. It's to do this in 1 year is unbelievable. And I think Cignetti has a plan to make sure that sustains and builds and continues to go. Because once you get it, you can't lose it. And I know that they're doing everything they can to make sure they don't lose it.
Yeah, we really are in the middle of one of the all-time great college football stories. But maybe it's not done. So give me the game plan. How does Indiana win this game on the road in South Bend?
It's got to be behind Curtis Rourke, the passing game, and picking up third downs. Indiana, when they've struggled to run the ball, it hasn't gone very well. And Notre Dame also has a very, very good rush defense. It's going to have to be picking up third downs, extending drives, finishing drives and getting into the end zone. On the flip side, Notre Dame likes to run the ball. They're very good at running, not only with Jeremiah Love, their running back, but Riley Leonard, the quarterback. Indiana has the best rush defense in the country. Statistically, that's going to have to hold up. If Notre Dame is running the ball and picking up 5-6 yards a pop, it's going to be a very long day. We've seen Indiana's offense struggle when they've played teams with really good talent, Michigan and Ohio State. Notre Dame is at that talent level. And so how do they avoid the pitfalls they fell into against Michigan and Ohio State? It's going to be extending drives, picking up third downs, and I think it's going to be behind the arm of Curtis Rourke.
The stadiums we've been talking about are just so cool. The Horseshoe is going to host a playoff game. Notre Dame is going to host a playoff game. Beaver Stadium is going to be electric as Penn State takes on SMU. How much do you think we will actually see stadium fans, and in this particular game, specifically weather, have an impact on the game?
It's going to be cold. It's going to be cold there in Penn State. I know the difference between the weather in Dallas and State College is like 50, 60 degrees right now. I live in Dallas now. I will be going up to State College for the game. I'm going to be bundled up and bringing all my jackets. It's a type of thing you can't really prepare for. I mean, all these SMU kids, the vast majority of them are from Texas and Florida and stuff like that. They've never quite played in an environment like this. Very few people in college football have, because we haven't had mid to late December home games before. So it's going to be a completely new kind of scene. We don't know yet about the snow. There's like a 20% chance, I think, for Penn State, for Notre Dame. We'll see. If we get to snow, then that creates a whole other issue. But the cold itself is going to be a pretty big adjustment, especially for those Southern teams that are coming up, which is what we've always wanted to see. I mean, again, I grew up in the Big Ten, and it was always Big Ten teams going down to the South to play bowl games. What was going to happen if the opposite was to happen and Southern teams were to come up? Now we're finally seeing that, and I'm really excited to see how it goes.
How could a potential upset happen? How do the Mustangs get a win?
Well, first, SMU has to avoid mistakes. They have been turnover prone. We saw it against Clemson. They dug themselves a pretty big hole there that they eventually climbed out of late in that game. Take care of the ball and execute your offense. They're one of the fastest offenses in the country, snap to snap. They're constantly going and going and going. And so they can't fall behind the chains in those situations. Keep those drives alive, keep those going, and get those big plays. They've got some really explosive, skilled players. Running back Brashard Smith, a former wide receiver, a big play guy. SMU can't fall behind. If it's a situation where they're down 10-0, 14-0 in that first quarter again, I think Penn State's got too much that they'll be able to put it away, because I think Penn State will be able to score a bit in this game. So SMU can't fall behind like they have sometimes in their biggest games.
Chris, I can't tell how big a deal Penn State's backup quarterback, Bo Pribula, transferring is just for this game. There's plenty of big picture talk about how big a deal and that they're stuck in this position. We have to make an announcement. But he's not your average backup. He gets in more snaps on a weekly basis than often backup quarterbacks do. He kind of has his own package, so to speak. How big of a deal do you think it is for this game in particular?
I mean, I think it's a pretty big deal for what you said. I mean, the guy gets regular snaps and has some plays. Those are now out of your arsenal. It's a weird situation because both of these teams, SMU and Penn State, their backup quarterbacks are in the portal, and both of them have had significant playing time. SMU's is still with the team. Pribula is not. Now, every individual player's situation is different. I don't know specifically why one could and one couldn't, but it's certainly not what you want to see going into this game. And if somebody gets hurt, I mean, we just saw in the SEC championship game, Carson Beck got hurt. He may not be able to play in the playoff. You have to have a good backup quarterback ready to go at this time of year, because I've always felt, for all the talk about the seeding and the advantages and who's got an easier path, the playoff is going to be a war of attrition. That's a lot of games on top of a regular season. You're going to get injuries. Who can work through that? And if you don't have your backup quarterback in a key situation, it could be really costly. We hope it doesn't happen. Obviously, we hope Drew Aller is okay. But it is becoming a situation for a lot of these teams can you make it to the end with most of your guys? We've already seen potentially one of the top quarterbacks in Carson Beck on the mend.
Chris is going to be a great read all weekend long and all 12-team playoff long. Thanks for your time, man. We appreciate it. Bundle up.
Thanks for having me.
Well, turns out Sarah Franklin and Lexi Rodriguez are two of the 4 finalists for the Player of the Year award. We'll find out that winner in just a matter of time. But the Big Ten well represented individually and well represented in the Final Four, as Penn State and Nebraska are both there. They're meeting up. Here's a look at the all-time track record. 7 national titles for Penn State, 5 for Nebraska, 18 Final Fours for the Cornhuskers, and these two are meeting up. It is with that in mind, we are thrilled to have our next guest. It is Emily Eman to talk college volleyball. This lady has genuinely become one of the best analysts in the country at volleyball. It is such a joy to watch her. Unfortunately, she knows it, though. Whew, big ego. Emily's joining us now. And Em, let me start with this. The Final Four, if I have this right, the final rankings of the regular season, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are now the 4 teams left.
That's exactly right. And I'm glad you took that dig at me to begin with, because I was kind of waiting for that. This is the first time since 2008 that the top 4 seeds have made the Final Four. That tells you just how rare it is. And to put that into context this season, we've seen upsets and so much parity. So I don't think anyone expected to see those top 4 seeds in the Final Four.
What does it say about the Big Ten that half the Final Four is from this conference?
I mean, it just continues to show that the Big Ten is the most dominant conference. Now, to put that into context, for the 8th time in the past 10 seasons, the Big Ten has had multiple teams in the Final Four. For comparison, the next closest is the ACC with just 2 of those years. So that tells you just how dominant the Big Ten has been, not just this year, but really over a long time frame. And I think Coach John Cook for Nebraska puts it best. Sometimes it's harder to win the Big Ten than it is a national championship, and he continues to beat that drum, which tells you just how hard it is for a coach that's won 4 national championships already. But the Big Ten has continued to be, the bar setter for college volleyball, and it continues to do so this year as well.
Meanwhile, for Penn State, they're back in it. It's been a little while, 2017 the last time they were there. How much does this season mean for their head coach, Katie Schumacher-Cawley?
It means so much. I mean, there's 2 sides of it. Katie Schumacher-Cawley was diagnosed with breast cancer in September. She's shown up every single day, has not missed a day of practice for those girls. She says it is the best time of a day, going into the gym, seeing her team, and she has just done such an incredible job. So from that aspect, it's amazing that this team has rallied behind her and that they're having the success that they've had despite everything happening outside the court. Now, the other side of that is it is so impressive, regardless of all of that, to bring Penn State back to greatness, because this means that it's her success. There was Russ Rose, who coached for 42 seasons and won 7 national championships, but this is her success and her players' success. For context, all of her 5 hitters are transfers. So those are players that she brought in by herself. Russ Rose didn't necessarily have any say in that. So it's really cool to see, both sides of it for Katie Schumacher-Cawley, as for everything she's going through to bring Penn State back to greatness in this incredible season.
Yeah, the imprint that Russ Rose left on not just that program, but the sport was so big. And for her to step in and make this program her own and to get to the Final Four with everything she's battling, it's such an easy story to root for. Let's turn to the other team they're playing, Nebraska. They were here last year. They were in the national title game last year. What can they take from last season's December into this upcoming Final Four?
Nebraska has been constantly preaching the entire year that they will not let happen what happened last December, this December. And they got swept by Texas. Each set team seemed to get worse and worse. The biggest thing for Nebraska was in that title matchup, they got aced 17 times. Fast forward to this year, Nebraska is the best passing team in the country, and they've allowed the fewest aces all season long. So they got in the gym right when that season was done and completely honed in on every part of the game, but especially passing. And, Nebraska's known for their defense, but this year the passing numbers have just skyrocketed, and they made sure that headed into this NCAA tournament, they would be in the best position to not only keep that offense balanced, but to not let happen what happened in last year's title match, because a lot of those players came off of that, just heartbreaking loss, knowing that they can't let the same thing happen in 2024.
And when you're breaking down a matchup, the first thing you want to go to is, okay, what happened when they met earlier this year? In an expanded Big Ten, there's now only one meeting between these two. But, Em, it was only 3 weeks ago, so there's probably a decent amount we can take from that meeting to think of what we're going to see in this next meeting.
Yeah, you can absolutely take a lot from that. I think, at the time, Nebraska was undefeated during conference play. It seemed like no team was going to touch them. And what that showed was even the most dominant teams in the country and in the Big Ten can be vulnerable and anyone can win. It was a gut check for Nebraska, who now in the NCAA tournament has held their opponents to an 0.66 hit percentage, which is one of the lowest in the tournament. And I think, the biggest thing that Penn State can take away is they have players step up that aren't just their outsides, Jess Merzik and Cameron Hanna, who are phenomenal players. But their right side, Caroline Juravicius, who was actually a transfer from Nebraska this season, she went off in that matchup. That was the biggest reason why Penn State was able to come through with the win. So this time around, Nebraska is going to be really honed in on her to make sure that she's a player that can't go off against them again.
You mentioned some players. I want to go individuals now. For Penn State, is Merzik the one we have to keep our eye on the most in this match?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Jess Merzik is one of the best outsides in the country. She's a player that continuously takes over, but especially when things are tight in those big moments, Jess Merzik becomes a go-to attacker for Penn State, and they rely on her. And that matchup against Creighton to send this team to the Final Four, it seemed like any tight moment, she was getting the ball, and she found a way to put it down. The key for Nebraska is really slowing down Penn State's outsides, but even more so, they have to find a way to slow down Jess Merzik. You can't stop her, but you have to find a way to get touches and digs against her.
What about individually for Nebraska? Who has to step up?
Yeah, it could be a lot of people. The thing for Nebraska is they are one of the most balanced teams in the country. I think what they need to do in this matchup is keep that same defense that we saw throughout the tournament so far. That's holding teams to an 0.66 hit percentage. With that defense, I'm looking at libero Lexi Rodriguez. I mean, she's one of the best players to come through the college game in that position. She's a finalist for AVCA National Player of the Year, the first libero to ever be in that position. She's a player that's going to have to step up and lead Nebraska's defense to slow down a really efficient attack that is Penn State, one of the top 15 most efficient attacks in the country. The thing about Lexi Rodriguez, though, is she continues to do this night in and night out. It's not like she has to massively have the best game of her life. Lexi Rodriguez just needs to do what she's been doing all season.
And really her whole career. I mean, she's been such a fireball ever since she got to Lincoln. Before we let you go, I don't want to look too far ahead, but you watch so much volleyball throughout the year, obviously with a heavy emphasis in the Big Ten, but you've been calling national games all year as well. Whoever wins this, I mean, there's going to be a Big Ten team in the national championship. What kind of road ahead for whoever it is in that upcoming match?
I mean, it's so difficult to win a national championship, but I think this year especially because you're either going to face Pitt or Louisville. Now, Pitt has been the most dominant team in the country all season long. They lead the country in hit percentage, and they lead the country in opponent hit percentage. That tells you how good they are on both sides of the ball. They've been ranked number one in the country nearly all season long. So if they win, it's going to be really tough to go up against them. Or you get a Louisville team who has a ton of confidence and a ton of momentum coming in. They swept Purdue in the Sweet 16, and they got a huge 4-set win over Stanford, who was a number 2 seed then. But the key for Louisville is also they're playing at home. They're playing in the KFC Yum Center in downtown Louisville. And let me tell you, I was at their regional last week, and I can still barely hear myself. That's how loud it was. So if you're getting Louisville in a national championship, although, they might not be up to the caliber that Pitt is, it's going to be really hard to root against the home team there with how much of a crowd they're going to bring.
She's Emily Eamon. She's our good buddy, and she's off to the Final Four. You're the best. Thanks for your time, man.
Thanks, guys.
Men's basketball rankings are out in the AP Top 25. The Oregon Ducks are in the top 10. Boilermakers and UCLA, along with Michigan State, are all top 20 teams. And the Michigan Wolverines, quite a turnaround they are having, are your final ranked team from the Big Ten in this week's edition of the AP poll. With that in mind, we're glad to bring in Jordan Taylor to talk everything in the world of Big Ten basketball. And, there's not like a perfect break point. We're not at the halfway point of the season. We're not done with non-conference play, but it's been about 6 weeks of the season. So you've got some decent idea of, maybe not best teams, but tiers where teams belong, right? That's fair to say?
Yeah, it's finals week. We get to catch our breath. Everybody gets to relax. We see where we're at. Some guys who are struggling had to go into finals week and be distracted by, bad field goal percentages, and other guys are feeling really good. But, yeah, there's quite a few teams, UCLA being one. You saw Oregon's ranked 10th, the highest ranked team in the conference. A lot to be excited about in the Big Ten.
Well, let's start with that highest tier teams. And you brought up UCLA. They are impossible to score against. Literally the #1 scoring defense in the country right now.
Yeah, 53 points a game. Mick Cronin is out there on the West Coast, but I think in his former life he might have been Bo Ryan or a young Tom Izzo or one of those guys. But they're impossible to score on. They play really hard on the defensive end. He's got a thing with you can't let your foot off the gas with young people, and that's because they feel the love. And he's 100% true. Out in LA especially, too. So the only way to do that is you got to play hard every position. You got to lock in. They're big. They're athletic. They take really, really good shots on the offensive end, which allows them to get their defense set. And because of that, you get those type of results.
They had that early season loss. Ever since then, they've now won 8 games in a row. And again, another nice win this weekend. Just really hard to get any form of offense against them. Michigan, another team you mentioned. It's hard to remember. This squad won 9 games last year. They've already won 8 in just the first month and a half of Dusty May.
Dusty May, well, he went out on a limb. Crazy if you ask me to schedule the type of schedule he did with 11 new guys, but I think it just shows his mastermind, shows his genius to be able to mesh 11 guys like that. And it could have gone, hey, guys are arguing this, that, and the third, but what they're doing, they're finding balance. And right now is the turnover battle is a problem. But they're finding a go-to. Danny Wolf struggled at the beginning of the season. Now he's starting to find his role, find his pace, and that pick and roll with Vlad Golden is something that they can lean on late in games, which amongst the team with a lot of balance is huge to still find that alpha or that go-to guy so that you can hang your hat on when you're struggling with turnovers or problems like that.
It's funny, I was talking this weekend about a couple Big Ten teams, and I was like, well, I think this squad's actually going to be different in February than they are now because they're all so brand new. They're learning each other, and the person I was talking to said, isn't that basically everybody at this point? And I was like, oh, yeah, that's kind of true.
It's kind of true, but not really. You take a team like Purdue. They've been together.
Right.
They've known how to win. They're just getting more from guys like Camden Heide and things like that. But Michigan, 11 new guys. They do have a couple guys who were roommates prior to come into Michigan. And you can tell with their turnovers, it's just a little bit off cue. It's not because guys are trying to do too much. It's not because guys are selfish. It's a bit of a timing thing. Even that last play against Arkansas, it was a backdoor. It was there. Roddy Gale, Danny Wolf just passed it a little too early, just a little off kilter. So I think they're learning at a different rate, and they're learning a different way compared to other teams who might have been together.
And by the way, their 2 losses, one was by 2 points. The other was by 2 points. I mean, they're this close to being undefeated in the first 10 games.
They're really good.
Of Dusty May. Maryland is in your group at the very top tier of the Big Ten. How come?
Maryland is one of my favorite teams. It was Michigan, and then I'll go Maryland, and that's because of the length, the athleticism. You have guys like Tafar Gapare, who were averaging 5 points a game, but now he's starting to find his rhythm. He had a big game against Ohio State. He's really rangy in that press. He gives them a lot of versatility, but then you got guys like Jacoby Gillespie coming over who can fill it up and shoot the ball, really improve three-point shooting team. And then Derek Queen, what's not to love, man? To me, he's the best freshman in the country. I know Dylan Harper is there. That's a lot to be said.
Right.
Cooper Flagg, guys like that. But Derek Queen has tendencies that are elite in the NBA right now to me.
17 and 8 is what he's averaging now. What do you like most when you watch Queen play?
What's not to like? I think he can guard on the perimeter. Coach Willard challenges him to go switch out on the guards, switch out on the bigs, and then switch with Julian Reese. But then also he's able to pass the ball. He's able to shoot the ball a little bit now too. 2 of 5 against Purdue. And then as well as he just makes everybody better. If you're a guard, what you love playing with him is he can relieve pressure.
Yeah.
He can bring the ball up the court when you're tired. The other big has to come get him. He's just he's fun to watch.
You know, Purdue is coming off a loss, but it was such an interesting game for them. They went through a 6.5, 7-minute scoring drought in that game. They still almost won. They lost the rebounding battle by 11 and almost won. They lost 16 turnovers in the game. These are things that Purdue does not always do, and they still almost won that game.
Well, that's exactly what you're talking about. When they're not learning themselves the same way that a team like Michigan, because they know what their strengths are, right? So when you're down and your back's against the wall and you're not doing things the way that you're necessarily supposed to, you know you have a guy like Braden Smith, like Fletcher Lawyer, like Trey Kaufman-Renn, where it's all right, we got to slow down, get the ball inside, or run pick and roll, whatever many of their strengths may be, and let's just take a deep breath, and we know we have a pedigree for winning, and we can figure this out. All
right, so that's your top tier right now in the Big Ten. UCLA, Michigan, Maryland, and Purdue. This next tier of teams, you've got Michigan State in there. What do you see in the Spartans?
Well, Coach Izzo, of course.
Yeah, that's an easy thing to see.
That's the easy analysis. But I think they found something in that North Carolina game in Maui. They found some offensive rhythm. They got to the free throw line, and it's carried over into the Big Ten. You know, they had a couple tough losses. Memphis was a tough loss. But they're starting to find a way to get into the paint, which is creating those easy shots. Jace Richardson is an outstanding player. Jaden Atkins finding his rhythm. And then Xavier Booker's coming on. He's double figures his last 3 games. And this is what he was supposed to be, everybody thought, when he was coming into Michigan State. So if he's doing that, still only 27% from 3. Trey Holloman only 25% from 3. They're still coming along. If they can make shots, you know they're going to run, rebound, and run. Yeah. That's just going to be a key to manufacture those shots.
You know, this is your first year doing studio shows with us on a consistent basis, so I want to take a quick detour because you brought it up. What was it like playing against Tom Izzo?
Oh, man, it's everything. It's the aura. As you grow up watching it on TV, and then when you get there, you're kind of starstruck a little bit, almost like you're playing. It's similar to LeBron or one of those guys for us young kids, but you go in, the fans, the lower bowl, they got the newspapers, and then you got Izzo over there. You see him snapping. Sometimes you're more focused on what he's doing than even Coach Ryan for me, which is, don't tell Coach Ryan I said that, but you know there's staples. You know it's going to be physical. You know it's going to be a battle. You know they're going to foul you, and they're going to get away with some, but hey, he's earned that.
Did he talk to you during games or after games at all?
A little bit, but not really, not a ton. So he kind of stayed with his guys, and I'm glad he didn't because I would have got to talking back. So.
I bet you would have. The Fighting Illini are a team that almost beat the #1 team in the country the other day against Tennessee. It was tied with just a few seconds left. Tennessee gets the ball. Nobody stopped ball. It was still a tough layup, and Tennessee ends up with the win. But Illinois looked really good most of the season.
Illinois looked really good. And again, go back to learning each other. They have a bunch of young players. Kasparis Yakachonis, Will Riley, Ivisic. All these guys are young players learning each other. However, KJ and Ivisic, they come from high-level basketball in Europe, so they don't know any better. Just like I said, I knew about Izzo. They don't know anything about the about the Breslin Center. So what you don't know can't hurt you. And they're just kind of going full speed, full ahead, and you know they're going to rebound the basketball. So in your Illinois, if you're going to rebound the basketball, not turn it over, you're always going to have a chance to win.
It's cool talking to Underwood. The 2 guys that work the hardest, he says, are Yakachonis and Will Riley. 2 youngsters on the team are the ones that are outworking everybody, kind of setting the tone for them.
Well, shoot, they should. They got the most to play for. You know,
right.
They're about to be multi-millionaires in the NBA.
That's true.
Be working hard, too.
The Oregon Ducks are in your next tier as well. Only 1 loss on the season, and it came against UCLA at the buzzer.
Yeah, they just need to find their consistency, and I think that's probably a good thing for them. They're playing really good defense. They play fast, but they haven't found that guard play from Jackson Selstead consistently, and also from T.J. Bamba. You know Nate Biddle is going to do his thing down low. So if I'm Coach Dana Altman, I'm going into the Big Ten play and the rest of this non-con saying, hey, if those guys can continue to find a way to shoot the ball and make plays, they're going to be able to make a lot of noise in the Big Ten.
Nice balance, too. 5 guys averaging double digits for them offensively. They're a fun team to watch. They could be a real danger throughout this season. All right, you heard him talk about freshmen, and particularly one guy who's getting tons of accolades, the dude we're looking at, and another guy in Derek Queen who might be better than them all. We're going to have Jordan break down the best freshmen in the Big Ten when we come back. Well, it's time for the Gatorade Game Leaders. You look at the Big Ten freshmen, those who are scoring the most. Dylan Harper blowing people away with 23 points a game. His teammate right there, almost 18 a contest. Derek Queen at 17. Kasparis Yakachonis with 16. And Will Riley, his teammate, a little more than 13 points a game. And we were just talking about the impressive freshmen, and that's a pretty darn good group right there of first-year players in the Big Ten. Let's break them down and tell me what you see in all of them. Dylan Harper has been, man, has he lived up to the hype. I mean, the confidence he has. He hits the game-winning shot the other day and just kind of holds the pose and stops and takes a deep breath. The fans go crazy. His teammates go crazy. He just kind of like, yeah, this is what I do, guys. I mean, I love his confidence.
Yeah, it's obvious that he's the son of a former NBA star. You can see the poise. You can see, I guess, the swagger. But, you know, one thing he was struggling with was shooting the 3 ball to start the year. 31% to start the year, 50% in his last 3. And that's on 20 attempts. So, he wasn't shooting it well. And to your point, he said, you know what, let me just shoot it more. And that might fix some things. But he doesn't have a weakness offensively. He splits the pick and roll. He can see every pass, see over the top. Now that he's shooting the ball better, he can play off the ball, which Coach Peichel does a great job at doing that against Penn State. They put pressure on him. Let's put him off the ball, backdoor cuts, come into handoffs, playing the pick and roll. So stopping Dylan Harper is not a challenge I would want to wake up with in the morning.
And he gets to be paired up with Ace Bailey. This is 2 top 3 recruits in the country, going to Rutgers of all places. And Bailey doesn't have quite the numbers as Harper, but he's still doing some really impressive things for a freshman.
Yeah, I love Ace Bailey. He's actually the perfect, I don't want to say Robin, but let's say, the 1A, maybe Batman, the Superman, or whatever you want to call it. The way Ace Bailey plays without the ball is actually refreshing. There you see just playing the dunker. He can get dunks, and when his shot's not falling, even though he makes those tough ones, he goes and rebounds the basketball, which is really, really a refreshing trait for these young kids today. You don't always have to put it in the bucket. And, one thing he did against Penn State, 15 rebounds.
Right.
And that is just, I think, something that, needs to be addressed in the game. I don't want to get on my soapbox, but the ability to go do that is something that makes Ace Bailey really special as a young kid. Still figuring out how to play defense and play offense at a high level, but he'll get it.
I don't mind if you get on your soapbox. I mean, we've got the time.
We
if
got
you want
time?
to preach, if you feel
You want
it.
me to?
Sure.
Well, I mean, look, a lot of times now these kids, you get used to playing with the ball. You see the James Hardens of the world. You see LeBrons and all that. And that just becomes the nature. You get with trainers, and that's what you do. But Ace Bailey is a guy, he gets those KD comparisons a lot. And I think the biggest thing about that KD comparison is what KD played with DJ Augustine, and he wasn't always on the ball. So when he wasn't making shots, which wasn't very often, he did go rebound the basketball. He did block shots. He found ways to impact the game. And I think that says a lot about Ace Bailey's potential as a pro prospect, but just also his overall character in the game.
And those 2 guys, again, were the highest ranked recruits coming into the Big Ten. But as you heard about 5 minutes ago on our air, they're not the freshman who's impressed you the most this year. That's Derek Queen down in College Park.
Derek Queen's impressed me the most in the country. And I don't like comparisons. I don't love them. I know I just did it twice, but might as well keep it going. He has a lot of Jokic tendencies. He controls the game as a big man. His footwork is impeccable. He's 20 and 10 over his last 5, and even stepped out, went 2 for 5 against Purdue from 3. Everybody is talking about Ace Bailey. They're talking about Dylan Harper. They're talking about Cooper Flagg. But Derek Queen's ability to even make Julian Reese better, who's a senior, and kind of unlock some things for him, even though his numbers are down across the board on the counting stats. I think his impact, Julian Reese's, that is up because of a guy like Derek Queen.
Yeah. Top 10 in the Big Ten in scoring, top 5 in the league in rebounding right now. And again, doing it all as a freshman. We mentioned Kasparas Yakuchonis for the Fighting Illini. This is a guy that, as we mentioned earlier, he works his tail off. He comes early, he stays late. He doesn't have the background of being intimidated by any person he's going to play or any building he's going to be in. Yep. He's been good from day one for the Orange and Blue. Yeah,
he's been really, really good. And I think this is the beautiful side of NIL. I know NIL is a polarizing topic right now, but KJ's a guy who, without that, might be somewhere in Europe. We don't get to see him very much. And then he comes to the NBA, and hey, who's this kid? Or for his own benefit, he gets to play in front of the country. Now he's a household name. Now everybody knows who he is. He's got a lot of momentum. And I think that's what makes college basketball special, is you get to see these young stars before they go to the next level. And obviously, he has a ton of talent. And same as Dylan Harper. He struggled a little bit at the start of the year shooting the 3. Now he's shooting 15 to 27 out in his last 4. If I'm a coach, what do? He gets in pick and roll. He's got a mid-range game. He sees the pocket passes like those Europeans do. He shoots it over the top of you. There's really no matchup for him. Right. And if you haven't been to Lithuania, which I'm assuming most people haven't, go out to Kaunas, Lithuania, and check out a Žalgiris game. It's one of the best atmospheres in the world to play basketball, and he comes from that background, so there's no arena in this country, NBA or college, that's going to scare him.
I like to imagine there's someone at home being like, I'm planning a trip to Lithuania, and I have no idea where to go. Where did he say? Hang on, let me write down that building. Okay.
I can spell it. Kaunas, Kaunas. You know what I'm saying? There's a nice casino out there, too. You go check it out.
This is perfect. You're a trip advisor.
I got everything. I'm multi-talented, baby.
Yakuchonis has a teammate, Will Riley, who came in with a lot of hype. He was going to be a superstar recruit the next year, classified up to get into this year. He's shown a lot of potential from early on.
Showing a lot of, started the year really well. Now he's on a little bit of that freshman slide, freshman wall. He's at the top of the scouting report now. So when you get to the top of that scouting report, which he earned, how teams guard you is going to be a little different. They're going to play you a little more physical. Struggling from three now, 1 for 17 in his last 4 from three and he's still 37% on the year. But what he needs to do is take a page out of Ace Bailey's book now. Go get some rebounds, get to the basket. Did a great job the last game against Tennessee, 8 of 9 from the free throw line. That's how you get your rhythm back. Take a deep breath. You got great players like Ivicic, like Yakachonis, who can get you the ball, can take pressure off you. I think it's just a matter of finding your game, finding your sense in the offense when the level of competition starts to ramp up.
And this is a pretty clear-cut top of the Big Ten, the best freshman you can have. But there's somebody else who maybe isn't putting up the numbers that these guys have been. They're not top 5 in the league in an important stat here or there. But Michigan State's Jace Richardson has impressed you. How come?
Same reasons that Dylan Harper does, actually. Maybe not at the same magnitude or the same production, but he is a pro. He's a pro. He looks like a pro, and obviously his dad.
Last name is a pro, right?
He's got it all. First name almost damn near too.
That's right.
So yeah, no, just the way he plays the game, really fundamentally sound, really disciplined with the skill set. Everything is very simple. I think now, same thing. We get carried away with the step backs and the pretty moves. Everything he does is so simple and breaks it down to the fundamental core that he just doesn't really have a weakness offensively. Doesn't quite have the size that Dylan Harper has, but as a scorer and as a contributor on offense, a decoy, a playmaker, he's really sound.
It's a heck of a crop of freshmen. I mean, for 1 year.
I can't recall a freshman class like this in the Big Ten. I don't know. Yeah, I think you can go back to maybe Greg Oden, Mike Conley, Daquan Cook. But even then, those guys, I don't think had to carry the burden of scoring and usage that a lot of these guys have, especially Dylan Harper, Derek Queen, and Yakachonis specifically.
Right. There have been guys and Eric Gordon was an incredible year that he had, but to have 4 or 5 guys who were so important to their teams early on.
Well, you're seeing guys, they remind me of guys like Evan Turner and Denzel Valentine in terms of the way they're carrying the offensive load. But E.T., Denzel Valentine, they'll tell you they weren't doing this as freshmen. So they were sophomores, juniors. So to see these guys do it at a young age is both indicative of how the game is coming along, but also a really big testament to how those guys prepare and work and mentally set themselves up for success.
I was in here Saturday doing the Penn State-Coppin State game, and Coppin State hasn't won a game all year. They won 2 games the year before. The game was over in a heartbeat, okay? That happens sometimes in the non-conference. However, there are other opportunities in non-conference play where you can get a really good win, a win against someone that really helps set the tone of your season. We're going to talk with Jordan right after this about some of the most impressive early season wins we've had in the Big Ten. You know what's funny, Jordan? Like 10 seconds ago, you're like, who's playing tonight? And I was like, I don't know, I got to look it up. And if I just looked down at my script, I would have seen, oh, that's right. Here on the Big Ten Network, you can see Maryland and UCLA in 2 different games right here on the Big Ten Network. It all starts at 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central, 4:30 Pacific time. And those wins are not necessarily the big nature of some of the wins that could be coming to teams through non-conference play. But there have been some really good ones. There are those tournaments we get around Thanksgiving time. There are some home and homes that we see with different teams. There are neutral site games in tough positions. Let's walk through some of the teams that have some impressive wins thus far this year. Why do you like what the Boilermakers have done? Well,
Purdue, exactly what we talked about earlier in the segment. They've played in the tournaments, but they've played a really tough schedule. Not so much to try and learn each other, but they're more so, hey, let's figure out where we're at, right? They have the 15th hardest strength of schedule according to ESPN. They've won some, they lost one, took a tough loss to Texas A&M over the weekend. But after you lose a guy like Zach Edey, let's try and see where we measure up. You got Trey Kaufman-Renn, and I think they like where they're at so far.
Remember, they had that Alabama win when they were number 2. It was the highest-ranked win ever at Mackey for a non-conference opponent. They had Ole Miss, where Miles Colvin got that putback at the very end for the game winner. So there's a couple nice wins for them. Illinois is in the middle of this fascinating stretch. 5 straight games where they either played a team that was ranked, including the number 1 team in the country, or the 2 teams that weren't ranked are their rival Northwestern, which they went to overtime with, and their next game coming up, their other rival Missouri in a neutral site.
Yeah, Illinois, again, similar to Coach May, I think Coach Underwood is playing with fire, if you ask me, putting those young guys through the gauntlet. But you got to tip your cap to them because they're only going to come out stronger. We talked about KJ and Ivisic. They don't know any better. But when you go in to games against teams like Tennessee and you go toe-to-toe with them, the only thing you can come out and say is, hey, we're right there. We're one of the best teams in the country. I know we lost, but I think you go into the Big Ten season saying, I ain't worried about this.
Right. What about the Michigan Wolverines? What have you liked so far?
Michigan is, again, they're finding depth. They're finding themselves game by game, and you can see it if you look at the tape. The turnovers are still a problem, but they literally have 11 guys that can go get you a basket at any time. And I think when you figure that out and you realize, hey, any one of us can do it on any given night, it gives you extreme confidence in your teammates around you, which is exactly what Dusty May wanted to put into place.
When you were a player and you saw like an 0-12 Coppin State on your schedule, were you like, awesome, it's going to be easy, or were you like, this is not going to be worth our time?
Yeah, I was like, I might stay back here in the locker room. I got to go call the girl or something like that. You know what I'm saying?
Got to keep priorities straight, man. That's smart. All right, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to have Big Ten Days throughout the week as the college football playoff gets closer and closer to happening. For Jordan Taylor, I'm Mike Hall. See you next time.